Welcome to the Economy Magazine at I-24 News, where we take a look at the world markets and the global economy. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Well, coming up today, Asian markets spiral after China suspends early trade. The Shanghai plummeted well over 7%. For insight on what's causing that pressure, we are joined on set by Sam Chester of Clarity Capital. And we speak to the head of Israel's largest food bank, Lekit, which is working to alleviate Israel's growing numbers of impoverished people. Food that would have otherwise gone to waste is redistributed to 180 nonprofit partners helping the poor. Let's start now with the headlines. TransCanada sued the U.S. government in federal court Wednesday, alleging that U.S. President Obama's rejection of Keystone exceeded his power under the U.S. Constitution. Obama rejected the cross-border crude oil pipeline back in November, saying that it would not make a meaningful long-term contribution to the U.S. economy. TransCanada is now seeking $15 billion, claiming that Obama violated the North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, U.S.-led airstrikes against IS oil facilities reportedly have cut the group's oil revenues by 30%. Since October, the U.S. military launched an intensified effort to destroy the terror organization's oil infrastructure. In a press briefing, U.S. Army Colonel Steve Warren said that IS was operating in a defensive position, having lost about 40% of their territory in Iraq and 10% in Syria since May of 2015.
We assess this operation has reduced their revenue by about 30%. We estimate that ISIL produced 45,000 barrels of oil per day before tidal wave 2. And it has been reduced to about 34,000 barrels per day now.
Well, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro named 2 university academics to major economic posts in a cabinet reshuffle on Wednesday. The move comes amid the showdown between the new opposition-led Congress and Maduro's administration. Earlier in the day, Venezuela's opposition defied a court ruling and swore into the new Congress 3 lawmakers barred from taking their seats. Well, oil-rich Venezuela has the highest inflation in the world and is now suffering widespread shortages of basic products.
I have decided to form this team to confront the serious economic situation in Venezuela, a result of the economic war from the fall in oil prices and of the war that American imperialism has waged against the national economy.
And Germany registered 1.1 million asylum seekers in 2015. Refugees from Syria make up almost 40% of those arrivals. This inflow marks a record for Europe's largest economy and 5 times more than the previous year. Not all have filed official asylum requests, and not all will be offered asylum. Germany recently vowed to turn back economic migrants.
The refugees and asylum seekers who come to Germany are firstly registered and then distributed without declaring their identity. This is what we call the easy registration system, and according to this first count, the number of asylum seekers in 2015 is a little over 1 million.
Lekit Israel is the country's largest food bank, which redistributes food waste to help the most needy. Now we are joined in studio by Gidi Krosh, the chief executive of Lekit Israel. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for hosting me.
Well, your organization recently released this report indicating that 2.5 million tons of food goes to waste here in this country.
Absolutely. It's a report that we've actually been thinking about for a long while to start somehow and create this report. And yes, 2.5 million tons annually are being disposed of with a value of 18 billion shekels. That's a huge amount of money. I think, though, most importantly is what can be rescued out of this food, and still it's staggering numbers. It's 1.3 million tons can be rescued with a value of 8 million shekel. That's a whole lot of money, I think.
Well, how are you reappropriating this food waste to the most needy?
Well, Lekit Israel actually is a nonprofit that works with 180 agencies throughout Israel. We're kind of like the wholesaler for the nonprofit agencies, and we redistribute the food with trucks that we send out to these nonprofits that we work with weekly, and we support about 140,000 people weekly with the food that we actually rescue. And Lekit Israel actually only deals with rescued food. We don't purchase anything. We only rescue food from farmers or from banquets, from halls, from hotels, and cooked food.
All right, so food either on the farm that hasn't been utilized for sale and leftovers, essentially, right?
Correct. Sometimes the farmer won't even pick his crops because they're too small, too large, or even there was a hailstorm that they suffered from and they can't sell it, they can't push it forward. support because nobody will purchase it. And when we shop at the supermarkets, we usually look at first and we look at the produce itself, and if it doesn't seem right, or if it's a little twisted or broken, then we won't purchase it. So that's why a farmer will sometimes abandon his fields, and that's when Leket Israel comes in and rescues the food. And that's part of the food. That's part of all the food that's out there that's being left to be spoiled and can be rescued. And there's a whole lot that still can be done. And I think this report is important because it's the first time it actually gives information to the government and to decision makers what the size of the problem is. And it's a huge size, as we said.
Interesting point. But how does Israel compare to other nations?
Israel is comparative to all the Western world, where about 35 to 40% of the food that we actually produce in Israel is being abandoned and destroyed, and that's comparative to the Western world. In the US it's 45, in Europe it's 40 to 45. So we're with the OECD countries where we want to be, but I think we have a whole lot more to do. I think it's very important for Israel to start in doing something in food rescue, just because of the expenses in Israel for food. For a family to purchase food is about 2.5 times more than in the US.
Interesting. Well, what else can Israel do to improve the situation and reduce this food waste?
I think it's, first of all, important to understand that the gap, the food insecurity gap in Israel is about 3 billion shekels. Now, if we take all this food that we can rescue with a value of 8 billion shekels, and we have something that we can do to kind of bridge the gap for food insecurity. Now, I'm not naive enough to say that food rescue will close the gap or will bridge the gap completely, but I think it's a good starting point to start. That's something that doesn't cost anyone anything. It just costs logistics to move food from where there's an abundance to where there's shortage. So food rescue, in essence, is actually logistics, moving the food, and that costs some money. I think that's where we need support.
Can the government actually do something here on this front?
I think the government doesn't need to do something by itself. It can support organizations like Leket Israel and a few other organizations, large organizations in Israel that do it. I don't think the government needs to form a company or something that can do it. I think there's a good pilot running for 13 years. It's called Leket Israel. So let's take that pilot, expand it, and grow it, and turn it into something national. That's where we want to be.
And lastly, several journals have praised your organization's efficiency. What kind of channels have you incorporated to make that kind of efficiency happen?
Well, I think, first of all, management is very important. We're a big organization. Our budget is 40 million shekels with a total gross output of 150 million shekels annually. And for that, you need management, good management in place, of course, good people to run the organization, and 50,000 volunteers. Let's not forget the volunteers that help and support Leket Israel. And the turnout is what it is today.
Excellent point. Well, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for hosting me.
Moving on now, renewed fears over a slowdown in China, adding panic to already volatile markets.
Markets in China saw a 7% decline today, leading the second largest economy's brand new circuit breaker mechanism to jump into play, shutting down the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock markets for the second time this week since Monday. On Tuesday, the losses in China were light, and Wednesday saw modest gains as the Chinese government injected cash into the market. However, yesterday saw losses in European and American markets, and today's shutdown led to negative market impact across Asia, from Tel Aviv to Hong Kong and Japan.
It's the second largest economy in the world and the largest in Asia. If China does not do well, the rest of Asia will suffer too. Because for the past 30 years, actually, China was the driving force for the growth in Asian economy.
With oil prices at 11-year lows, having dropped around 35% last year, ongoing geopolitical pressures, and a slowdown in growth in markets including China's, worry is the pervasive feeling. As news of a poor Chinese manufacturing report sparked investor weariness in these early days of 2016, Beijing has moved to keep its economy in check, in part by devaluing the yuan and setting up new regulations for trading. As the storm seems to be gathering steam, the effects will be felt far and wide.
The U.S. used to be the biggest trade partner before, but in 2014, China became the biggest trade partner. And if your biggest trade partner is going through problems, obviously this affects you directly.
The fail-safe system that kicked in to shut down trading was put in place in December after last summer's Chinese market rout in late August, which led onlookers to wonder if the government would be able to handle future crises.
Asian markets in free fall on Thursday after China suspends the early trade. Now for analysis, we are joined by Sam Chester of Clarity Capital. Thanks very much for being with us today. What caused this shock to the markets?
Well, Any story that is talking about Asia is obviously going to have to focus on China. The big story here was China. China's Shanghai index has dropped 12% over the past week, and that's really what has sparked the drawdowns we've seen throughout the Asian markets, whether it's been Korea, Japan, Taiwan. It's all really started in China. The problem in China, as often has been the case over the last year, is that the economic slowdown in China is actually worse than we think. The numbers that we saw from the government, they turned out to be worse. The Beijing has again stepped forward in the last week, and again they're lowering the currency. They do that to try to help their manufacturing, help their exporters. But when they do that, they worry investors, they worry people who look at the markets, and as a result, you've been seeing the stock exchanges in China falling.
Yeah, there has been that speculation that, in fact, the Chinese economy is much worse than Beijing is letting on here. We saw some manufacturing data earlier in the week, which really sparked this downturn. But what was different from this manufacturing data from previous reports that we saw?
Well, there's a few other factors, just taking a step back from China for a moment, that are also at role here. One, often when you have geopolitical crises happen around the world, people's reaction to them is, oh, this is going to hurt markets. Something bad happens, markets will react negatively. This past week, there's obviously been two major crises that have occurred. The first one just a few days ago in North Korea, when North Korea announced that they had tested a major nuclear device. And the other one that's been going over the course of the week, unclear, is between Saudi Arabia and Iran, two major energy exporters, which of course is very important for Asian markets. What's surprising, though, is that both of those crises really haven't had the effect you may have thought. The effect they have had is they've raised pessimism and made people in the markets become even more concerned about volatility moving forward. But just to look at the Saudi-Iran example, you would think that when there's a crisis in countries that export oil, that the price of oil would rise. That's generally what happens. What we've seen this week, though, is that oil has fallen to the lowest point in almost 8 years. So, in fact, the geopolitical crises, while concerning investors and making them sort of burrow inward and sort of look for safe assets, aren't having the effects we may have expected.
So is that like a one-time shock?
In North Korea, I mean, it's interesting. North Korea has actually tested a nuclear device, or at least claimed to, almost every 3 years since 2006. And the markets have sort of gotten used to it, and they've sort of learned. The prognosis with North Korea is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Things are not going to, suddenly turn the corner there to make people, from an investor perspective, look forward. But I think the way markets are looking at it is this is a one-time glitch. It's not such a concern. North Korea is not integrated into regional markets, so it isn't such a concern. Of course, Saudi Arabia and Iran is a whole other story.
All right, well, what's happening there?
Well, what you're seeing there is the two countries are really facing off. Tensions are rising, and when I mentioned that it hasn't had quite the impact we might have expected on markets, there's a few reasons for this. The minor reason is that it's not that Saudi Arabia and Iran have not been facing off for the last decade. I mean, look at Syria, look at Yemen, look throughout the region. This isn't a new development, and therefore markets have sort of, again, taken into account, and the spillover effects are somewhat reduced. But the major reason here is that oil prices in particular are not looking at the crisis in the Middle East. They're looking at a global oversupply of oil, which has led the price of oil to fall below $30. And already we're expecting it to fall just in the next few weeks, in the next few months, even below $20, which would really be a historic price for oil. And it comes down to the fundamentals of global oil price. We're talking about a massive oversupply. We're talking about Iran coming onto the market after the sanctions come down because of its nuclear deal with the U.S. Iran is going to start providing oil on the market. Saudi Arabia is committed to oversupplying the market with oil. That goes back to about 2 years ago when OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, decided that they wanted to undermine the new shale oil exporters coming out of the U.S. by controlling the price of oil and lowering it. So really it's this oversupply of oil. It's oil dropping beneath $2 in the U.S. as of this week, which is, again, levels we haven't seen in decades.
So you're saying the markets are more concerned about supply-demand economics here, not so much about regional disputes intensifying.
Yeah, I mean, just this morning in Libya, there was news that came through the news wires that several oil factories, oil exporters in Libya were taken out by terrorist attacks. And normally something like that would send the price of oil spiking upward. But if anything, the price of oil just continues to go down and go down. The more the China economy decelerates and slows down, again, that puts less demand on oil, and the price of oil shrinks as well.
That's shocking because you see here the global instability only increasing here. These parties that have been fighting each other proxy style, essentially almost going into direct war with each other in a way. Why isn't that having any more of an effect?
I think that the controllers of the oil are really in Riyadh they're in Tehran, and then, of course, on the demand side, they're in Beijing and they're elsewhere. And it's the combination of the demand side and the supply side that is really determining the oil price. And that's why really the story of oil is very much linked to the story of Asian markets and the slowdown in the Chinese economy. Ultimately, most of this comes back to what is going on in China. When will we see the Chinese economy turn the corner? In the next few weeks, we're planning on seeing what was 2015 growth rate for China. Did they hit their 7% mark that they were hoping for, or did they fall short of that as well? We'll have to see in the next few weeks.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us. Of course, we will be watching China. That will be the central story, at least as of January. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Natalie Ehrlich from the Jaffa Port in Tel Aviv. And join us again on our website. It's i24news.tv.